Warning: the information given during this podcast is from professionals discussing situations from our experience and sharing knowledge.
We are not treating or diagnosing what you are personally experiencing, and if you are having difficulties, please seek professional help.
Hello and welcome. This is
It's Not You.
It's Them.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Rich.
This series is about checking in and looking at ways to explore what is going on around you.
And we are back for another episode. Yay! This is our last episode now. This last episode of this series. This week's episode is about being desensitized. So we're going to look at what that means, how it affects people, what it might look like, and things to be aware of, and things to also help counteract it.
Yes.
So should we start with the first bit?
Yeah, kind of what emotional numbness is.
Numbness is, yeah. So I've got.
So, go ahead.
We cannot selectively numb emotions. When we numb the painful emotions, we also numb the positive ones, which I think is important. Yes. It's like a catch-all. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. You can't just shut out the bad. It kind of all gets shut out because the brain can't distinguish between what's a threat and what isn't because it's been triggered. And it's important to recognize that if you try to shut them out, it will be all of them. Not, you have to address them and you have to work through them for you to recover from that.
And the danger of disconnecting with emotions, so it can lead to a whole host of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual issues that will become dysfunctional coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree? So, like,
yes.
Yeah. So, like, they've got mild to severe depression, which can be understandable, spiritual emptiness, the inability to enjoy life, inability to form close and fulfilling relationships, disconnection from the inner self, confusion, irritability, fatigue, addictions, chronic illness, and somatic illness, which is produced by the mind. So I think there is quite a lot that can go wrong with this.
Yeah, and I think chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia, chronic pain disorders, things like that, the body stores that trauma. So whether you've emotionally dealt with it or not, there is a piece of work where you do have to address the physical effects of dealing with desensitization, trauma, PTSD, dissociation, any of the things that go along with not listening to your inner self, right? And if that inner self has been slowly deconstructed, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, you have no idea how you ended up knee deep in it. Like, and that can be really difficult. You have to track what your body is doing, right? If you suddenly start having these somatic, which means body symptoms, headaches, backache, knee ache, random pains, you need to look around what's going on around you and kind of what's happening, because that really is kind of goes back to what we talked about last time about those triggers and red flags, is your body is telling you something is not okay. So that's what that's talking about with kind of like issues produced by the mind. It's not dismissing those conditions or disorders, it's just a result of typically unaddressed trauma.
So technically about the desensitization, it's almost like if there's a whole building and there's a fire alarm going off and somebody just put on cancelling headphones and just sat there. That's essentially what the desensitization. So you're not listening to any warnings, even though it's all going on around you. That's where people are. Yeah.
Yep. Which is a dangerous place to be.
Dangerous place to be, especially if you can't smell the smoke or hear it. Or feel it getting warmer, do you know what I mean?
And are not able to, right? Yes. Like if you've, on this sliding scale, if you have gotten to the point in a relationship, friendship, family situation where it's gotten to the point where you no longer can care because it's not safe to, that's a really difficult place to be.
Do you think there's a link there with how empowered somebody feels?
Yes, because I think if you're taught to not trust your own feelings and your own inner self, there is nothing else, right? We all have to trust that gut instinct. It's primal, it's built into the very base of our brain, like, to survive. So if you've managed to somehow override that, or someone else has overridden it for you, it's a really scary place to be, because you no longer trust your own voice.
The reason I was thinking of that is just like in terms of like you feel like you've got no options left. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like I'm thinking through debt, financial issues, you know, when you just think like there's no option forward and you just feel like I've got no power, or like the way sometimes the government's going at the minute, you know, like I've got no power in what I'm doing. Yeah.
And I think the kind of the bombardment of awful things going on in the world through social media, news feeds, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, like you open your phone when you get up in the morning and it's carnage, right? Let alone your own life, but everything else that's going on, especially people from kind of our generations and the generations below us, typically have more of an empathic connection with the world and people around them. There's more, we need to do something about it. So to see that what's going on in Ukraine, to see what's going on in Afghanistan right now, to see what's going on in America with school shootings, England with the level of poverty rising, like all of these different things, it's overwhelming to the point of you have to step out.
Right. I'm tapping out. I've had enough. This is too much. And you know, we even go all back. We're collectively as a world, we had the pandemic, which was like we were all shut in, shut in, pushed in. So we're like taking away anything that could distract us. We're sat in it, and I remember people saying, "I only tune in and watch the headlines in the morning because you just needed the next thing to watch and the next thing to be on top of, and it's almost like doom scrolling, don't they? They call it doom scrolling when you're constantly looking for that's disgraceful, that's terrible, and it's just you don't know where you end up.
Well, I mean, like the death tolls were recorded like there were stats in a football game. Like it was.
Yeah.
I remember I was stuck in England at the time. I couldn't get back over here to my home in America, but just the anxiety of, am I going to leave my house? And I'm not an anxious person. I don't really experience anxiety, like worry. But the stress of it, I'm going to go outside and I need to get groceries.
Yeah.
Who is putting anyone up? Like that paranoia kicking in almost like, oh, I touched this and I touched that. Can I sit in my car? Do I need to, like, and no one was, and because nobody knew how to cope with it, it was just this free for all. Like the government didn't send out enough stuff in terms of like, this is what's happening because they didn't know. And everything went to telemedicine and people were trying to figure that out. I know me and you were trying to figure out our own clients, like how do we continue to work, like and also interestingly being forced into your own home without coping skills and without those things that we seek, family, friends, human connection, how much more depressed and anxious and not okay everybody was. And it feels like
it's like almost like you had to confront it, or
exactly.
I thought there's almost the point of like you could only be desensitized to a certain point where like, oh, I'll just do nothing because I get so scared that I can't go outside my front door, but I still need to get the groceries and whatever. So it's like having that, because it was one nominated person at the time, wasn't one you could leave the house to get it. And it's just the point where if you were that person, if you were like the parent and everybody else was kids in there, you had to like shove all that to one side to get on with the job. That's
and
quite
culturally speaking, like the difference between how England handled it versus how America handles it is very, very different. It's very much like British people, we love a good rule, right? We love a good order.
Good cue.
Right. We love a good cue. No one was going to push in front of everyone. People are going to wait outside. Whether we liked it or not, we're still going to wear masks on. But Americans, they're a bunch of honey badgers. Like, they do not care. They will, I don't have to wear a mask. You can't make me. Like, a lot of the videos around, it's my constitutional right, all of that sort of stuff going against it. not that I'm saying that all British people are the same, but my experience of being British and my experience of British people,
Yeah.
watching them follow those rules was a very different, very much more serious, much more fear-driven, government-driven sort of.
Yeah.
You need to wear a mask, and it was then I saw a lot of people wearing N95s, a lot of people wearing the proper ones.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got back home to America, it was about 9 months later. So still pretty pandemic-y, pretty
Yeah.
in the thick of it. There was a lot of deaths over here, especially on the West Coast. But still, there's kind of like they have worse things to worry about over here. Like, you know, like it was just like, oh, that's just another.
But the numbers, you're right, we get desensitized to the numbers, because I just remember as it was clicking up. I'm like, I've got no concept of how much that is. It's like, if someone said, this is like the whole of Birmingham being wiped out in one go. If someone said, if this is all of like, because it was just like number. It's like, it could be the lotto prize number, because it was just going up so much, and it didn't capture the pain, the heartache of those families, the people who were denying it, and they had loved ones who'd left, the poor, but amazingly brave people who were on the front line doing the work, and not being, and after all of that, being shafted on their public sector pay after being the ones to help. You know, it's yeah.
And a lot of that, like, that's a really good example of that desensitization, because there's a lot of, well, what can I do about it?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do about the 150 school shootings? No, we're on 200, nearly 300, I think. There's been more shootings this year than days in the year over here in America.
But that is frightening. That is absolutely frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, but does it just get into the cycle of like there's outrage, and then all of a sudden then it just fades? But then how can it fade if it's always in the news? It's like.
But I don't think it's fading. I think it's filtered into what stories make the news that day, right? Like what over here, it feels a lot more politicized in terms of what news stories get reported based on who they are affiliated with. That seems to have been my experience. I think if there was a school shooting in England, it would be absolutely horrific, right? The last school shooting we had was in 1987. Gun laws changed that year, and we've not had one since, not on the scale that Americans have had them.
I think the only thing, the only one that stands out of my head, and bearing I'm a little bit older than you, just a tiny bit older than you, was Dunblane. Wasn't the guy who knifed the knife attack? Like was a machete.
I remember the guy on the street, the guy that was in uniform. Yeah. But again, it's like over here at the moment, Kentucky has just been completely flooded, right? Completely flooded, like once in a lifetime floods. There's hundreds of people missing, and it was reported 2 or 3 times. But there's so much other worse stuff going on, like the stuff that's got nuclear issues with Ukraine, Chinese issues, like the
Taiwan,
right? You can't keep up, and then let alone all of the pandemic stuff going on in, unfortunately, the third world countries. Like India is just trying to get enough boosters to do the second lot. Why are we not talking about that? But it's like there's not enough space. Emotional space, spiritual space. Like you said, like I think the death toll was like 4 million at the moment for COVID. No one's we've just for sanity's sake, I think a lot of the news and stuff has had to move on, because and as awful as it is, you know, you've got famine in countries, like everything, you cannot hold that much space for that many people all the time. And we learn that the hard way as therapists, training therapists. You can only hold space for what's in the room.
Right.
That's it.
It's true.
Within the boundaries and parameters that are set out in a therapeutic relationship, right? We have quite restricted boundaries. Now, as a person in the world, we don't have those. We don't have, hey, you know, and our phones, we live and die by our phones. Like, we are bombarded day in, day out with, if you choose to have them, news alerts, if you have Twitter, you know, anything that's going on that gets flagged, like all of the Netflix stuff coming up right now, all of the, you know, Jimmy Savile, R. Kelly, like all of those awful events that you watch horrified that this is even allowed to happen. But then look how it was allowed to happen, right? Like at some point you have to check out.
But that's what I think, circling back to especially the R. Kelly one. I think what was interesting with that was when I was watching some of the documentaries, they were saying some of the victims or some of the people who were like around at the time, they said it was a well-known fact.
Yep.
That he will be patrolling around the schools and whatever, and like just to be aware of it, like that's what I mean. Like they couldn't
stop, actively stop it. It was just everyone was in acknowledgement that this is something bad.
Yeah, this is something bad. This is something bad, and we can't. This is how we manage it because no one's coming in and stopping it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a bit like, I'm like, yeah.
It was the same thing with Jimmy Savile. That went on for decades. Decades. And you talk to these comedians and people that had him on their shows, and they're like, he was totally weird and like made some really inappropriate comments.
Yeah.
Like, but it was this like unknown or known consciousness that was just like, he's the dangerous person and there's nothing we can do about it.
I suppose even like you go as far as Jeffrey Epstein, like the whole thing there, like they're so big, they're so famous, they're untouchable. I'm not going to go against
because they could end me. Yeah.
Yeah. And they've got resources, whatever.
And I think it's important to kind of note that there's a difference between emotional numbness and complete dissociation, right? You have a quite large sliding scale, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is categorized as an injury to the brain. There's been something that's been so traumatic that your brain has been unable to cope with it, and it's stored it in your filing cabinets and in your body, and it's fragmented, right? So you're not able to really ever fully recover without consistent and long-term trauma therapy or treatment. But essentially your brain is always recovering from that PTSD. So emotional numbness, we experience, I think, in fluctuations as we go throughout the day, right? There's things that we engage with and things that we don't engage with based upon our need level, right? Our ability to cope. Stuff that goes on at work, some people might be able to just completely shut it down. Well, if I'm at work, I'm at work, and if I'm not, I'm over here.
Yep.
But then it becomes that, like, okay, is that your way of dealing with it? Avoidance is a coping skill. It's not a good one, but it's a coping skill.
It's in the box that people can use.
It's in the list. Yep, and I'm taking it. Being able to have a space to deal with it, right? Like if us, for example, we have quite an emotionally and mentally draining job, and it's really important that we have those boundaries so that we don't bring our client stuff with us into our lives, right? It's not ours to carry. We can hold space for it, but it's not ours. But jobs like EMTs, ambulance people, firefighters, police, nurses, correctional officers in the job that I work at, there really is no skills that are taught specifically for dealing with the emotional outlet of trauma, whatever that looks like. Because particularly, I mean, these people are witnessing, they're having to spray people, handcuff people, they're picking up people's body parts off the road, they're dealing with fire, like, and there's none of this processing, right? Because in those types of jobs, you're tough. You're tough of the
keep going, keep talking. Next thing.
What do you mean? Like, this is a normal Tuesday, the house is on fire. But to anyone else who's not trained, that would be horrific.
Right.
And you'd be in therapy for that, because that was traumatic. But then you could say the same thing for therapists, right? The stuff that we hear and witness to people's pain, that we can become desensitized to that if we don't continue our work and don't continue our training.
I was going to say, but do you feel like, is it desensitized, or do you think it's just emotional resilience? So because you're like, we've got the supervision, we have clinical supervision, we have check-ins, we have ways of processing it, I suppose.
Yes, I would say if you have been doing it a while and are able to process it, I think that's the key word. I think even for the EMTs and the firefighters and police, if you can process it and you're not developing negative coping skills as a result, right? Like that disconnection from your body, like disconnection from the event, disconnection from your own senses, like thinking about that event. Do you remember being there? Right? Do you remember the smell, sounds, hear it? If you don't, or you do but it's not affecting you. Yeah, and that's what I mean by it's a sliding scale. Like you could do the same job as somebody else, and that emotional resilience is much higher in you. And they talk about emotional resilience as like genetic, like epigenetics, where some people are just more emotionally resilient than others. But I think when it's blown at us, when we have no choice or control over it, I think that's when it does the most damage.
Because we choose to do these jobs, or we choose to do them things, so it's like you've taken a step towards that, so you're kind of like a bit more prepared and a bit of an idea. I think there is it does concern me that how many of them jobs do you have a place to process it as part of the normal way of working, rather than just, oh, you've got your mates, you lot can deal with it however you're going to deal with it. How many close calls could someone have, like if you were an EMT, oh my god, you just had a child, and all of a sudden now you're like, that could be my child. It's just like all them situations that come up, it's like, how would you get a chance to process them, like just what you're saying.
And I think the mass desensitization of the news and things, like it would be very odd if they then at the end of the newsreel were like, now we're going to meditate on that for 5 minutes. Like it would be a totally bizarre situation.
Like, why do we meditate on it? Like what? What?
Yeah, but it almost like needs to happen in some way. Like,
correct.
Or I mean, if you just heard about the stuff going on in Afghanistan or Rwanda or Zambia, like, but you're physically removed from that. Like, it's not happening to you.
Do you think there's an element of like, also, there's pressure around like, be aware of something, be like involved in, like can't be like, don't let it go. I think there's a lot of like
the whole woke thing.
Yeah, and I don't think woke's bad. I just think it's the whole thing about, hello, listen to this, like remember this is going on somewhere else. It's almost a bit like, remember it's more than just your little world. It's this space. Look at how it's been affected by people and all these different spaces. And I'm like,
but you can't carry that. Like the expectation is that people can carry that, right? Like indefinitely, and are thinking about it constantly, and are thinking about all of the awful things, climate change, assault, battery, like all of those things that are going on. There is no physical way you can carry all of that in your brain.
No.
You can't, because you've got to look after your own children and go to work and look after your own self, and then you end up with this stickiness of like, is that selfish? Should I be doing that? Like,
but do you think it's on that hierarchy of needs? If I think it's one of them bit, like when your higher self, I've got my work, my job, everything else is going on, and eventually I can get to this space, and we don't always get to that space that often.
No.
And you have to work to get to that place where I could have more opportunities to do it, and when they do get there, to do a bit of that work, I think is important. But as you're saying, like stuff like doom scrolling. But you also notice there's a weird human, well, definitely for me, of if there's somebody that speaks a lot of vitriol or a lot of hate, even though it's all the views I'm against, I'm strangely drawn just to see what they're saying. Do you like? There's one particular person who's like quite anti-trans, and she's a spokesperson like in the UK, and I was like, I heard her on a couple of interviews, and then I I clicked on the YouTube channel to listen to what she was saying, just because I was like, part of it was like trying to understand where that person's coming from a little bit, but also a bit like, what? And I could just find myself getting more angry and then more drawn to it, and it's a bit like I call it the Howard Stern effect, because he said like he had a huge population of listeners because they equally tuned in because they loved him, and also they wanted to tune in because to see how offended they would be by him.
I mean, having known you for as long as I've known you, I think a lot of it is like anarchy, right? Yeah. Like, and look at the professions we have. It's like that seek to understand. I think as long as humans can understand, something is not so threatening to the system, right? Like, well, if I can understand where they're coming from, maybe I won't be so offended by it, or maybe I can try to glean some understanding of it. And sometimes it does not work, and you just categorically do not agree based on your own experience. And but I would always suggest, if something is triggering you,
Yeah.
and you're not too sure why, or something is really generating a fierce response, is why? Why is that response there? What is happening? What are you hearing? What's going on that's causing you such a strong reaction? And then that's when you make a choice then, isn't it? To either shut it down and shut it out, which is that like, whatever, dude, I'm out.
Yeah.
Or attempt to process like what that means.
And be at peace with it. It's almost like, yeah, you've got the information, process it, like that person's got that particular view, you've explored it, you've done your attempt of trying to understand it, and it just, that person's in a different place.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our experiences again come from the way we were raised, right? The way that we are built to understand, process, and it comes from our parents, of course, or caregivers, whoever was your functioning adult in your life at the time. And not being able to regulate your emotions, unfortunately, comes from our parents. If you were taught that your emotions are too big or too scary, or you were taught that you weren't allowed to be angry, or you weren't allowed to be sad, or that sadness was weakness, any of these like weird distortions of, I mean, I had them. I grew up with them. I came from a military family. Like, you processed it and you moved on. There was no sulking, any of that stuff. So it's hard to shake those as an adult if you don't actually sit and work through them as to what do you think now as an adult in the world, rather than just continuing to go along with whatever value system was put in you.
It's like the old programming, when actually you can take it out and actually, does this bit fit with me? No, I can throw that out now. No, like actually I want to put a different processor and have this different, better. Like, no, I need some space to process my emotions, and I can have that space. Is, you know.
Yeah. And we're not going to survive as a species if you all day, every day, well, you're going to survive as a human if you all day, every day sit and devour the news and try to fight world battles by yourself, right? Like, it's not possible, and it causes more emotional damage and friction as you know, that old saying, kind of pick your battles. Like, you have to, for your own sanity's sake. You can't fight world climate change by yourself, as an individual. You can't change governments as an individual. Like, it doesn't, you can't do that. And then there's this like learned helplessness that goes along with that desensitization, which is, I'm just going to do me because I can't.
I can't do the rest.
I can't do enough. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there is literally nothing wrong with that. Like, at some point you have to decide it's me or them.
Right.
Right?
Always choose yourself. Always choose yourself.
Well, you come in by yourself and you leave by yourself, so there's that kind of mentality.
Be on your own team.
But I know you want to talk a little bit about when you don't see it coming.
Yes, a lot of when you don't see it coming, because I think that this is from my experience working as a project worker, especially when they're talking about young people and children who could potentially being groomed, or sometimes it was groomed for sexual exploitation, and sometimes it's groomed for things like gangs. You know, it's simple. Like, it doesn't always have to have a sexual element to it, but it's that bit of I remember it quite clearly talking about like male victims. Like, there's a lot of training material around female victims, but there's very limited material around like identifying male victims, because there's so little that report, because the groomers have such an interesting, I use the word interesting very loosely, way of approaching it, because there was one particular like model that can be used as like the house party model, where they'll get this young attractive female to try to talk to these guys, to get them to come along, and promise them there's lots of other girls there's going to be, you know, drink or whatever they're not allowed to have there. They get there and there's a few girls there, and then the girls will disappear, and it's just left that one girl, but there's lots of other men there, and then it's almost like they start daring them to take less and less clothing off. So eventually that becomes normal. They desensitize you to going, this is the new normal. So then you don't feel so weird about it. Then it allows them to be pushed into this other place of, oh, just do that thing as a joke. Do that as a joke, and now I've got a video, and now I can blackmail you. And because of the shame attached to all of it, and we're not talking about this young person's sexuality at all. It's all about what's been done to them and the fact that they won't report because of like they don't want to be perceived a certain way, or there's a shame about it, or boys don't get sad or cry, all that stuff that we get taught. And it's slow, it's subtle, and it uses all of the things around shame against that person, and it's just such a devastating thing that can happen. And it's true, like the desensitization works across like both, all genders when people are being groomed. It's just that feeling of it's bit by like what we were talking about last time, that insidious drip fed. Oh, what are you wearing that for? Don't wear this, to the point where you just don't feel anymore because you've been told not to feel anything. That's normal. That one gets you the good behavior. You being compliant gets good behavior. You not being compliant gets you nothing, or punishment. It's quite. I think it's quite important to be like aware of like when you're around people or around situations that are not familiar to yourself, and then thinking, all right, am I actually comfortable with what's going on here, or does it feel a bit weird? And then abusers prey on that questioning. Yeah, of course it is. Are you not? Why aren't you cool about this? Why aren't you like? You know what I mean? Like there's that pressure. They know when to apply the pressure. When actually it's okay to kind of go like, actually I don't know how I feel about this, and do you want to back off? Like I'm not into this. This is not me. Where's what I came for?
Yeah, I think that's people are sort of, and it's that tiny voice right that's in the back that's like, I don't know, and a lot of that comes from experiencing something that you have no reference for, right? Like being in those house party situations, being young and ending up in some dude's house like you thought was okay, like all of those things that you have to, I can't say it, you have to trust your gut, like you have to go with what is built into you. Like, does this feel okay? If it feels a bit weird, trust that feeling and get out.
Leave until it doesn't feel weird, because it won't feel weird if someone is aware that you're nervous and they can see that because people can tell if someone's nervous or not feeling it, and then they can make you like, they can talk to you about it or whatever it is. A good person will acknowledge it, talk you through it, and then help you do whatever you want to do. These abusers just hijack that thought process and take you where they need you to go.
And I think that was really, the most popular example of that is Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Is that from his perspective, he had told her he was a recovering addict. He had told her that he had been abused and experienced PTSD. He had told her he had been with other violent, abusive people. And that still didn't stop the abuse. Actually, it probably perpetuated it even further. But witnessing that unfold with kind of this mouth open response sometimes of like, what? What is happening?
What's actually going on here?
But because he was male, and because I don't agree with how it's publicized in that it was everyone was bombarded with it 24/7. Like, these are two people that need treatment. Both of them need treatment, mental health treatment, and I don't think there's always three sides, right? Yours, theirs, and the truth. There's always the truth that we were missing in terms of the charade that went on in that courtroom. But on the bottom of all of it was that you had a victim and an abuser, and the abuser used the fact that the victim was desensitized to abusive responses, being smacked around, being belittled, and that's what enabled that situation to get to where it was that desensitization of, this is not okay, you should not be treated like this is not acceptable. And even that recording of her saying that was just kind of the icing on the cake of, that is desensitization in a nutshell. They knew exactly what they could use against you and were really not bothered if you felt otherwise.
Right. And then it's just, that was kind of, yeah, everything what you're saying. Agree with 100%.
It was just really eye-opening. I mean, I'm glad on one side, in terms of mental health therapy and treatment, I'm glad that they showed it so that you could
Yeah.
see a female abuser, because
Yeah.
they do exist, right? They are real. This is a real thing. They're not as common as male, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And men deserve to have their stories heard with the
Yeah.
same level of compassion and understanding as
Yeah.
females are. But also how it happened, how that drip approach slowly deconstructed any boundaries, any resistance, any knee-jerk reaction to inappropriate, disrespectful responses. But it was just tiny little pieces at a time.
Because that was one of the things, wasn't it? Like, you hit me. It was a slap. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then I can think of other examples, not with that case, and like in general, like with somebody will like say something horrible or really, deeply wounding, and then it's just
Yeah.
banter. It's just a joke. It's just a joke. And
I
I'm
didn't
like,
mean it like that. Yeah.
yeah, you took it the fun way. Why are you being sensitive for all that stuff that invalidates what you're experiencing? And I think these are the phrases, these are the taglines, these are the bios of all the people who are not in a well functioning relationship
Yeah.
state.
And I want to spend a minute going over what you can do to get out of it, right? Like, we're all kind of doom and gloom from this end, but
Yeah.
Because we want you to know, we want you to understand what it means, what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, so that you can address those issues, reset those boundaries, be more communicative, and be more clear. Like, I don't accept that, I'm not okay with that. And then be able to get yourself out. So that's why we kind of wanted to go into that much detail. And like, your self-care is the priority, right? If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling shut down, like, unplug your phone, limit your time that you're on listening to the news or watching the news, turn off some of those alerts. Like, don't have it blasting at you all day. There's nowhere to put it. Like, there's not enough room, there's not enough space to carry that much.
Because like, it's right. It's like creating that space for yourself. Like, if you're worried about like, oh, people ping messages at me while I'm at work, so it distracts me, put it on airplane mode. Just because it comes through doesn't mean you have to respond to it straight away. Like, create that space. If that looks like you go in the gym first thing in the morning before you start your day, so you've got that little window that's just on you for what you need to create your little headspace. That do it. It's like it's so important, and there is useful things around being desensitized can be used in a positive way, but this is like based on the situations. It's very much like if you've got to help reduce anxiety about something, you could use it. So if someone's like, large crowds freak me out, part of it could be like going to like medium set, like a bit almost like CBT, really, isn't it? Going to a smaller venue and then build up and figure out what's going on, why you feel anxious about it. But that's just a small bit of how it can be used in a positive way.
I mean, there's also, positive affirmations or gratitude affirmations can help you reset your brain in terms of getting stuck in that doom and gloom feed rather than positive. What is happening is awful, and what is happening in the world is chaotic. But at the moment, where are you right now with what you were doing? Right? So kind of like being thankful for the life that you have. I'm grateful for my friends and family. I'm able to see the good in each day. I'm thankful for the obstacles I've overcome. I have everything I need. I'm thankful for my health. Small things that you can come up with, kind of those daily positive affirmations. Usually they say 3, to use 3 over a 21 plus period of days. And it can actually help rewire that part of your brain that's struggling with the stuff that's going on in the world. And some people are more sensitive than others, and that's a good thing. Sensitivity is not a bad thing. It's not a weakness. No. It just means you're more susceptible to kind of getting caught up in that kind of chaoticness of the world.
I suppose it's like, if you're also aware that you're like quite sensitive, it's also like, and know that you can be impacted by other people's energy. That's really important to know. Like we say, it's not a bad thing, but you have that one toxic person at work who's always like Eeyore. You probably won't want to be sat next working to them for a while. And then
And
come away
it's
feeling all,
important, yeah, absolutely, to be mindful of that. I experienced that myself. I wouldn't say I'm quite an empath, but I'm pretty
yeah,
close to it.
yeah,
And I very much am affected by people's vibe, energy,
yeah,
whatever it is they're bringing
yeah,
with them. I sort of feel that before they open their mouth. And you have
yeah,
to be, whether it's sage in the car before you get out of it, whatever it is, right?
yeah,
Swinging
yeah,
some crystals around, something that you feel disconnects you
hmm
from whatever is taking something from you. Whenever you watch the
yeah,
news, whenever you do all these things, or wherever you feel heavy, you have to do something to disconnect the weight. Whether it's put it down for a minute, go to the gym, go talk with
hmm
your friends, turn your phone on airplane mode. That's a great
yeah.
example. Listening to music, running, whatever it is that resets your own mental health is going to be really important just as a functioning adult, really.
I think, but you're also like right about limiting the amount of time, because if you notice that you're starting to doom scroll, like, well, hang on, wait a minute, why am I doing this for? What's, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Why
put
am I
it
doing it
down.
for?
There's nothing new. Like, I think
What is,
there was
what is the purpose of the behavior, right? Why am I
why.
doing this?
Yeah. I mean, there is one friend that I know who turned around and was like, well, I'm not going to read about it anymore because if they're going to send a nuke, they're going to send a nuke. This sweet that I can do about it. So
I
I
mean,
was
fair
like,
enough.
there's a truth to that, because like even if we knew something was being launched, what would you do?
Hmm.
You've got an X
Yeah,
amount of distance you could run or get in a car and move to. Like, what's gonna happen is gonna happen.
yeah. And I think there is a small part of acceptance. It's like, this is what I can do with the resources that I have right now.
Yes,
And
that.
getting caught up in climate change is overwhelming. I don't want all the whales to
Yeah.
die. I don't
Mm,
want, people to get trafficked. I don't want
mm,
stuff to happen in other countries where they're being bombed off the map. But
mm-hmm.
there's only so much you can hold. And you're not
Right.
responsible for everything. You're responsible for you, your children, and your family, and kind of how you present to the world, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you are actively involved in human trafficking, that's a problem. Right? That's a
And
problem.
to step yourself out of it, and then make you feel, like
Right.
get out of that bit. But
Yes.
there's
You
stuff that you could do.
prioritize, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You could have a
but
lot of
just,
stuff, but then do you feel like you could be passionate about one? Like if it was really meaning a lot to you, go and volunteer and do a bit
of
of charity
course,
time, do a bit
of
of
course,
something.
re
Yeah.
reassign that passion, that energy into something that does something, whether
Yeah.
it's volunteer, you
Mm-hmm.
know, any of those things. I think, don't take from this that we're telling you to ignore it or put it away. It's like, don't carry it like a 300-pound weight through every single
Right.
moment of every single day. You just can't.
Yeah. And they said the same thing. Like when I was like, you do voluntary stuff, you do whatever. It's like you know what I mean? Like you can put them out. Like there's another one who set up a charity in London, and he's like getting to the point where I think he's done like he's worked in several different bits of like AIDS foundations, like loads of different things. Like, and he's like he feels funny about like maybe coming to retire, and I'm like, you have given your time, you've done your time. Let the next person pick up what they need to pick
Yeah.
up. Because I think
Yeah.
there's also limits. Like you're not expected to endlessly give, and
Right.
you can't give to lots of different things. You may as well pick one that means the most to you. That's the passion can carry you through
Mm-hmm.
the work that you want to do with it. Whether that's like setting up a small donation thing every month. Do your little bit for. It doesn't have to be a little bit, but do the bit that makes you feel okay with what's going on. Like I'm making a difference here.
Yeah. I think that's the important thing, right? Is if you do feel that passionate about something, do something with it.
Yeah,
There are many options, like you said, volunteering, donating, organizing charity drives, anything like that
yeah,
that channels that empathy, that kind of kindness into other things. It's just be
mm,
mindful of it, and you
yeah,
you are not responsible for everything. You're only responsible for you.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah, put a bit of good back into the world. Every
Yes.
little. It goes a long way.
It really, honestly, really does. I mean, they rarely do they tell us all the good things that are happening. We only get
Yeah,
told the awful things that are happening because that's what turns people into the news, right? Buys the papers, sells the
yeah,
licenses, whatever. But I think there's a lot of good in the world still.
Yeah.
There's people that will help others regardless of what political, gender, color they are, race they are, any of those things. And that's what I choose to hold on to is I know that there are good people, and I'm sure whenever I needed somebody would be there.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I feel strongly about, because I definitely had access to support groups and stuff when I was younger, coming out, all that sort of stuff. And if I hadn't had that, I would be, probably not where I am today. And I'm like, I always want to give back what I benefited from, because you want to pay it forward to the next people who might need it, because that's what somebody did for me in order to have that support in the first place. So
exactly, but that's essentially why I'm a therapist. Somebody changed my life for the better, and I feel indebted to kind of push that back out into the world and to help others, because it was life-changing for me. And if I can do that for one person in my life, then I've repaid that debt. So but we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, dude, there's your stories, your woes, things that you're worried about a lot, and what you're going to do about it. That would be nice to hear the bits of what you're going to do about it. Like, let's put yourself into a bit of action and not be overwhelmed.
Yes, and if you are overwhelmed, get some help. Reach out. It's okay to be overwhelmed. Just don't unpack and live there.
Yes, everything about that sentence. Yes, I'm not gonna live there. It's a bad neighborhood. Don't trust what they tell you. It's a bad neighborhood.
So this is the last one in this series.
Yeah.
So the next series we'll move on to, are going into more depth in some of the items that we've talked about. So please send us your questions, comments that you thought about this series, and if you'd like anything answered or topics for the next one, please let us know in the comments.
The link. Comment in the links, and we'll put all the stuff down there in the whatever it is. Being old and can't do technical stuff.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. All right. Thank you very much for listening and being a part of the journey.